Thinks Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. My name is Sudisha, and I am a junior research scholar at the Takshashila Institution. I work on the 20 Million Jobs project, wherein we research how India can build a policy landscape that can create 20 million jobs every year. Today, I have with me my friend Rahul, who is a businessman in Kolkata, and his business has been thriving in Kolkata for many years now, started by his grandfather and then carried on by his father and other family members. We wanted to learn how easy it is for businesses to survive or thrive even in Kolkata, and I thought that it would be wonderful to have Rahul as a guest who can walk us through how exactly businesses are able to sustain in Kolkata, what are the challenges that businessmen face, and is it a landscape where we can expect more jobs in the future? So hi Rahul, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Sudisha, great to be here. So as you said, right, I come from a business family. I'm the third generation businessman in my family. And we've had a bit of an interesting history. My grandfather was living in a small village in Saurashtra near Gujarat, and he immigrated to Kolkata post-independence in search for better economic opportunities and a better life. Kolkata back in those days, having been the capital of the British Empire in India, they were glorious days for people living in Kolkata. Lots of businesses, lots of opportunities, a very active port, a thriving tea industry, a thriving jute industry, lots of manufacturing, and a big strategic trading hub for not just the Britishers, but also for the Indians living here. So considering all of those factors, a lot of people immigrated to Kolkata back in those days. And my grandfather was one of those individuals who decided to try his luck. So he came to Kolkata and he settled down here. And as was the norm in those days, he basically started out in the textile industry over here as an accountant for an individual. And that's how his journey started, from starting a job as an accountant for someone and being invited to get into business with him because of his ethics and honesty. That's how he got started into the business. And ever since that has happened, we've continued on. The legacy has been there for the past 60 odd years now. And it's been a very interesting journey for us as a family. We've seen a lot of ups and downs in this line of work. We've seen Kolkata in its glory days and how things have changed, sometimes for the worse and sometimes for the better. And we've branched out into a lot of other things apart from our old textile business. So yeah, that's about it. A brief background about myself.
Yeah, that was a very succinct answer. Thank you so much for answering. I think that brings me to my next question, which is that obviously you said how 60 odd years ago your grandfather came from Gujarat to Kolkata and how he established a business here, which you and your family have been carrying on till now. And since that time, I think the landscape in India has changed completely, right? Gujarat, where your ancestors come from, is one of the most profitable places in India to do business in right now, right? So that's just one example of how things have changed, whether due to political forces or due to any other reason, weather, climate, any other reason that you can consider, right? I want to understand, in those 60 odd years, I'm sure that you've had discussions with your father and grandfather, and you've also seen it firsthand. How do you think the landscape of the state, not just in Kolkata, in general, how has the landscape of West Bengal changed over the years? Has it become easier for businessmen to establish businesses in Kolkata and West Bengal as a whole? Or has it become more difficult? And can you give exact, let's say, aspects on how things have improved or how things have changed for the better or for the worse?
Yeah. So coming back to this, discussions that we've had within the family about how the landscape is in Gujarat compared to how it is in West Bengal, the comparison and the discussion always boils down to essentially the ease of doing business as we speak. A lot of factors play into this. One is the basic ecosystem of West Bengal versus, let's say, Gujarat. The other is a lot of different political factors have been at play in the past 60 odd years. And essentially, the discussion always, the one factor that does play into it is the pre 1991 versus the post 1991 comparison that we've always, that has been one big factor, liberalization of the economy as we speak. That plays a lot into this. So, coming back to this discussion, basically, the landscape in Gujarat versus the landscape in West Bengal is very different. Gujarat has essentially embraced what we say free market capitalism in all its glory. It has a very large manufacturing base, which, in my opinion, is the best way to go about so-called developing a state. If we talk about it, like an ecosystem around manufacturing has been created. And if you look at Gujarat, in a way, you can identify hubs and pockets of concentrated industries. For example, Surat and its surrounding areas are known for petrochemicals and pharmaceuticals and specialty chemicals. You have Rajkot with its machining and tooling industry. You've got Sanand, which is the automobile hub of the state. You've got Ahmedabad and its allied surrounding areas, which is known for its dye industry. So that identification within Gujarat is very clear. And I think it's partially driven by the policies that the government has taken over the years in terms of encouraging businesses through ease of land acquisition, having a very robust and very encouraging MSME policies by giving out subsidies, and the ease of access to capital is also in Gujarat is also very high, which is essentially driving people to take risks. And Gujaratis in general, are entrepreneurial by nature. So, when you throw all of this into a cauldron, along with a very stable political environment, which encourages businesses and industries, you get what Gujarat is these days. Compared to West Bengal, things are very different here. The manufacturing base over the past 60 odd years has shrunk a lot. You had Hindustan Motors over here, Uttarpara in its heydays, which manufactured ambassadors for the entire country. And in the past 60 odd years, as I said, the manufacturing base has shrunk a lot. There are not a lot of big industries which manufacture a lot here. The manufacturing base here is basically restricted to the iron industry, which makes a lot of ingots and allied products. There is also the tea industry here. There's also the jute industry here. And agriculture is one of the biggest driving factors of the Bengali economy here. So it's basically chalk and cheese in terms of approaches, in terms of policies, in terms of the general attitude that people have. Bengalis, you could say, I'm not wanting to generalize a lot, but, business is not really encouraged within the Bengali community here. And if you do look at the statistics, the business owners are Gujaratis and Marwadis immigrated from other states to West Bengal here. So yeah, in terms of these two states, you can see how government policies, how the demographics of the state and how things have developed over the past 60 years have shaped the destinies of these two states.
Yeah, that was, I think, a good history lesson on how things have changed from one state to another. And to any Bengali listening, I just want to make them feel good for a little bit and say that they are more creative at heart as compared to Gujaratis. So they deserve that. Okay. So now I want to get into the specifics. I know, since I'm your friend, that you have a textile business and you also have a real estate business. For someone who you think has, let's say, the capital to start these businesses in Kolkata or West Bengal as a whole, what do you think it takes, with a special focus on policy and economics, to not just start these businesses, but also ensure that they sustain? And I've heard your frustrations a lot of times where you discussed about how many times you have to visit the court, or and all the other things that happen, which are huge challenges in operating a business in general. With that in mind, how can one be ambitious enough to start a textile or a real estate business in Kolkata? What does it actually take for them to do that?
So if we look at the textile business, it's generally considered to be a low barrier of entry business. It does not take a lot of specialized skills. So to really get into the business, If you've got access to capital, there are a lot of different things that you can do within the textile business. Traditionally, textile businesses are driven by very fragmented supply chains, very long credit cycles, and a massive gap between supply and demand. Like generally, supply is large and demand is not that much. And you can take a look at the textile based data that gets generated every year, where you see the number of garments and all of those which end up in landfills because of overproduction. Right. So that's one aspect to the business. From a policy perspective, these businesses, if you're not really into hardcore manufacturing of fabric, the textile business or the garmenting business is not really, polluting in that sense. So you don't really need pollution control board licenses or anything of that sort. One big area of focus for the textile or the garmenting business, if I speak about in a specific manner, is a lot of focus and a lot of attention is given on the compliance side of things, because historically these businesses are said to exploit labor. Right. So internationally, we've seen the cases of, sweatshops in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, in China, in all of these countries. And in a way that has encouraged a lot of standardization, at least on the compliance front with regards to labor practices. So you've got to get licenses like SEDEX, ISO compliance, and BCI compliance if you are into the organic side of things, to stand a good chance of doing good business and working with big brands. Apart from that, another challenge that one has to deal with within the textile business, especially when it comes to labor, it is very unorganized. It's a very fragmented business, and labor shortages are a big challenge when it comes to production planning and ensuring that your business delivers on time in a way that it is supposed to. So those are the two or three major challenges, long credit cycles, labor issues, and compliances. So these are three areas of focus when it comes to the textile and the garmenting business. On the other hand, if we are to talk about the real estate business, if you do have access to capital, there are a myriad and big maze of laws when it comes to the real estate business. And a lot of these laws find their roots in the British Empire, the British Raj, so to speak. Bengal was said to be the land of zamindars. And that zamindari, while it has been abolished, has given us a lot of laws which may sound archaic in this day and age. But, they do exist because they are the byproducts of how zamindari used to work in that day. You've got things like thika tenancy, which is a byproduct of the zamindari legacy that Bengal has. Apart from that, one big thing that West Bengal still has, which not a lot of other, in fact, which no other state in the country has, is the urban land ceiling. So essentially a byproduct of the communist ideology, ULC basically does not allow a single company or an entity to own more than 7.5 katthas of land in an urban area. That is the gist of it. And for one to own large pockets of land to develop it, you essentially have to create hundreds and hundreds of companies to buy up land, amalgamate it, and create a fairly sizable project if you want to. What that essentially does is it just increases the complexity of doing something like developing a residential project. It leads to a lot of corporate, I could say, misgovernance when it comes to company laws and company practices, because you're essentially having hundreds and hundreds of companies for one piece of land. So again, a legacy of those days, which the entire real estate community within West Bengal feels should be done away with. Apart from that, another challenge that we have faced here within this time frame, at least in the past 5 to 7 years, is the West Bengal HERA that has been struck down by the Supreme Court. But RERA, which was supposed to be implemented in West Bengal, has not yet been implemented. So there is a bit of a regulatory vacuum these days, which has led to a lot of projects being stalled, a lot of big developers hesitating to really go after big projects, and leaving a bit of a vacuum within the market wherein buyers may not necessarily have the best options when it comes to home buying. While all of this has been happening, in order to drive up the collection of revenue, stamp revenue, so to speak, what the government has done is they have given us a discount on, circle value, on stamp duty, and on registration fees. So that has driven a lot of people to, buy up new flats. That has also have been encouraged by, historically low lending rates. So home loans have been easy to come by for first time or new homeowners. And that has led to a massive bump in new house registrations over the past 1 year. So while that has really helped the government fill up coffers and really help builders and promoters within the industry here to offload whatever inventory they've had post COVID, it really hasn't jump started the industry in the way that it should have when it comes to launching of new products and stuff. So again, as I say, a very complex maze of laws and regulations drive this industry within West Bengal. A lot of it is unnecessary. I feel a lot of it is a legacy of the British Raj, and a lot of it doesn't really connect the way it should. So what you've essentially got is a set of fragmented laws which drive this industry, and they are a landmine if you're not really careful about it.
Okay, thanks a lot for answering that question. Before I get to the last part of the podcast, I'd like to take a break. Okay, we're back. And I think I want to jump to the last and probably the most important question, which is the creation of jobs. I want to set a bit of context. You run two businesses with your family. I think I want to understand how many jobs you've created over all these years. Do you think that the industries within which you run your businesses have the potential to create more jobs? That's one. Another one would be, we now know that there is a huge labor law reform that's happened across the country, and this course shows that it's more in favor of establishments as opposed to workers. So establishments are definitely empowered in the last decade or so with the ease of doing business in India. So do you think that impacts you positively, and does it have the potential to create more jobs? To sum it up, I think what I really want to know is, do you think that West Bengal is well on its way to create sufficient jobs for its youth and just the population in general? Or do you think that it's falling behind, or it's the number of jobs are receding and there is probably no hope inside? I would like you to shed light on that.
So if we were to speak about job creation, at least within these two industries, textile is one of the biggest employers within the country. It contributes a significant percentage to the GDP of the country, and it has a massive potential to create a lot of jobs within West Bengal itself, because a lot of traditional artisan based textiles have come out of Bengal. You take your Takka saris, you take your Tat saris, all of these come from Bengal. And there is a lot of skill here. There is a lot of talent in West Bengal. What we lack as a state, I feel, is a really cohesive, I could say, platform to really go for it. Apart from that, as a state, we've always been in the news for brain drain. Youth in Bengal is migrating to a lot of different states in search of better blue collar and white collar jobs. Wages for the unorganized sectors have been historically low compared to the rest of the country. And that has not really encouraged job growth in any way within West Bengal. Apart from that, not a lot of big industries have come to West Bengal in the past couple of decades. And that has not really led to creations of concentrated ecosystems within the state in terms of having specialized skills in one particular or, a couple of areas. So that really hasn't helped a massive creation of jobs, so to speak. There are still employment here is basically restricted to the MSME sector, the informal sector. They are the biggest employers within the state of West Bengal, and they may or may not be in line with what the youth of West Bengal wants going forward. So that is why you see a lot of brain drain. That is why you see a lot of migration to the other states in search of a better standard of living, better salary, better wages, so on and so forth. When we talk about the ease of doing business rankings and how India has jumped a lot of places in the ODB rankings, I may not agree with this in the sense that those changes have not really reflected when it comes to the state of affairs in West Bengal. Things haven't really changed. New industries have come here. We don't really feel that, doing business in West Bengal has become any easier. Partly because the burden of compliance for a small businessman keeps increasing. When I talk about burdens of compliance, I talk about the taxation system. I talk about the GST implementation, which doesn't really help. I talk about state compliance laws in terms of clearances, at least in the real estate business. If I were to talk about clearances from bodies which don't really have a function within the scheme of affairs over here. I talk about the long lead times when it comes to getting approvals from government agencies, which is again a big challenge. So, EODV across in the world rankings, India might have jumped places, but as a common businessman and, doing business in West Bengal, I don't really feel that.
Right. So I think that we've covered everything that we wanted to with respect to what it takes to start and sustain a business in Kolkata and West Bengal as a whole, and whether we are able to create more jobs or not. I agree with your point on brain drain. I think it's happening across the country. Youth from Kolkata might be migrating to other states, but in general, I think a lot of people who could have stayed behind in India itself are going abroad for better opportunities. So it's an important point that we discuss in the project on immigration being a possible avenue for creating more jobs, but at the same time, we want to make sure that brain drain does not happen either. So thanks a lot, Rahul, for joining and for shedding light on these issues. And thanks to the listener for listening to the podcast, and we'll be back with another one soon. Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.